Right, welcome back, Ukpromuscle podcast. Today we have a very, very special guest, Mr. Dr. Jordan Shallows. For those of you who don't know Jordan, you must be living under a rock. He has been a legend, especially in the industry, leading specialist when it comes to performance. And to me, is definitely the go-to person that has changed my perception of a lot of things. Obviously, I will let Jordan introduce himself in a minute and talk about a little bit about what he does and what he provides. But long story short, I did Jordan's Prescript course, which he will tell us about. And that has certainly changed my views on a lot of things and has made me a far better coach and far better athlete. So I think today's episode is definitely going to be a very, very good one. And I think we will get some invaluable info that you can all benefit from. And I definitely feel like a lot of my audience will certainly get a lot from this. So Jordan, tell us a little bit about yourself. We want to know everything from scratch, from top to bottom, mate. A lot about yourself, what you stand for, what you do, and what you provide, mate, because a lot of people are definitely interested in that. And I think we need to really dig into more the education side of things as well, because you were the first person that has introduced me more so to studying the academia a little bit more and actually getting to the ins and outs and whys. And that has made a world of a difference for me and my development. So let's dig in.
Yeah, so a little background info about me. I sort of started in the industry as a chiropractor. I went to chiropractic college in San Francisco, California. I'm originally from Canada. Upon graduating, I sort of just got pulled into, almost by happenstance, into the world of competitive powerlifting. One of my first patients in clinical practice was Dan Green, which anyone who knows powerlifting will certainly know of Dan. And I had been weight training probably for the better part of 5 or 6 years at that point, maybe a little bit longer. And was decently strong, squat, bench, and dead. Was always geared towards like the sports performance route. Started lifting weights to sort of pursue or to see how far I could pursue my hockey career. Sort of growing up in Canada, like the natural progression. So really was always interested in lifting weights from a performance standpoint. Like always had this athlete first mentality, and it was really sports and the injuries I succumbed to in sports growing up that actually led me down the road of chiropractic to begin with. So was pretty lucky and fortunate to just be able to match with an athlete like Dan pretty well, just being a bigger, stronger, more avid weightlifter. I wasn't going to give him the generic answers of like, just, oh, your knees hurt when you squat, don't squat, your shoulder hurts when you bench, don't, your back hurts when you deadlift, don't deadlift. Like those aren't options when that's how you put food on the table. So was able to kind of have a really cool mentor-mentee relationship with him, where he kind of took me under his wing, and I learned so much just being able to see really what the body is capable of. Like again, if you guys don't know Dan's training style, he really does push the limit of, like, you watch him lift a single and you're like, certainly that was a one heavy single and he has 6 more reps. You're like, this guy is the 1% of the 1% when it comes to strength sports performance. So was able to like really trial by fire, kind of learn simultaneously learn from him as he coached me through my first powerlifting competition. I was simultaneously working as a chiropractor at Apple World Headquarters in Cupertino, California. So I had a high volume of patients on the other side of the spectrum. So I got to see, literally at the time, he was the strongest in the world in his weight class, holding numerous records in the 110 kilo and 100 kilo men's open powerlifting weight classes. And then I would go to Apple World Headquarters and work with software engineers that make your iPhones. So it was a really interesting contrast. And then getting, another dynamic lens to look through. It's almost this kaleidoscope of like human potential when it comes to performance. I was also the strength coach at Stanford University for the men's and women's rugby team, 7s and 11s. So I had, my days were inundated. I was at school and then would take this textbook and I would go work with strength athletes at Boss Barbell Club. I would then, consider myself a strength athlete and still try to do that from time to time. And then I would go to Apple and I would work with, at mass general population problems of a stationary or a sedentary persuasion. And then I would go onto the pitch and into the weight room in a more like group setting, strength conditioning, sports performance. And sort of through that is how I learned and adapted and adopted the approaches that I've taken. And then, I left California and started Prescript, which is basically like synthesizing this way of looking at human movement through these different lenses of chiropractic rehabilitation, corrective exercise, air quote, sports performance, bodybuilding, hypertrophy, strength training, and really just like trying to figure out a more efficient, applicable way to meld these concepts together. And so I started Prescript in 2016, and then started working on the education side, and getting contract with most Brits are probably most familiar with Ultimate Performance. God, fuck, that guy will be the death of me. So I'm probably gonna get sued for that. So Nick, if you're listening, fuck you. So Nick,
my days.
Yeah,
oh my days.
They're the best.
I think I've heard of them before, to be honest. I don't think they've got a good. I don't think they've got a good reputation, if I'm totally honest with you.
No. But most people will know the James Bond villain that is the lab accident in Nick Mitchell. So God rest his soul when he does eventually get himself a heart attack. But all to say, it was honestly like I was really honored to take on an education role with him, and he was lucky enough to put me in his clubs and let me kind of espouse my viewpoints. And he was a big early proponent of Charles Poliquin, which is a big mentor of mine. And then had similar contracts for basically overseeing and developing education programs at scale for corporate gym franchises looking to revamp tarnished reputations of personal training, Canada, Good Life Fitness and Mo Body Fitness Clubs, and more currently Altera, and then obviously UP on the international side, and then Prescript sort of branched off into its own entity in the last couple of years. And I've sort of just been traveling around holding lecture while still trying to hold on some muscle mass while I travel around and just talk about the stuff we're going to talk about today. So that's sort of like a brief snapshot of the career so far.
Yes, I love that. And anyone that knows Jordan, I think every single week I look at his Instagram and he's literally in a different country, in a different location. So it's pretty incredible to see him travel so much and obviously share a lot of the good stuff worldwide. So tell us a little bit more about Prescript and what it offers, because I know there's level 2 now. I had the pleasure of doing level 1, and that was immense. It has totally changed my views on common practices, which we'll dig into. But also tell us a little bit about that as well. And we actually have got a seminar upcoming at UltraFlex in Rotherham in March. So just tell us a little bit about that as well and where people can find it. Obviously, I'm going to add links in the little description thing that people can look you up on, and obviously go onto Prescript and look at the courses and obviously buy the place at the seminar. So just dig into that a little bit before we move on as well, please.
Yeah, so Prescript is an education company that's centered around functional anatomy and applied biomechanics. So trying to solve a lot of essentially solving problems by having a deeper understanding of sort of like the source code of movement. We go through, and I use the computer analogy a lot, and we try and execute as athletes, regardless of sport, we try and execute, whether it's more efficient, whether it's more consistent, or whether it's for a longer period of time, we try and execute, more, elaborate or, higher bandwidth programs, whether that bandwidth requires more intensity, longer duration, or higher intensity, higher velocity. So basically, we're like really trying to get to the ones and zeros of human movement to bridge the gap from this rehab world of low threshold stimulus, static, passive, corrective exercise into making more macro level decisions around exercise selection, volume, intensity, training duration, intensity, density, things like that. So ultimately, we're an education company that's focused around getting a deepest understanding of the human body and biomechanics while still remaining applicable. I think that's where in previous iterations of this, potentially, like we've away with the theory and we've kind of lost the plot. It's like we still need to be able to make real-time decisions on reps and sets, exercises, and so forth, right? Like these are the tools in which we communicate to our athletes, it's communicate the way we communicate to our clients. So what is the line where the theoretical just becomes petty dick slapping in peer-reviewed journals and shit posting on Instagram about people who don't know what they're talking about, but are way bigger and in better shape than you? Like, shut the fuck up. So what is that line? What is things that can make, because when we deal with high performers, and this is why I've sort of branched into or back into like, the conventional sports performance realm, it's like these decisions, does it matter if your client does a lat pull down neutral versus supinated if they just started training? No, probably not. Doesn't matter. And that's, where a lot of coaches start and end their career is at that level. Look, those people got money, and some people really enjoy that demographic of clientele. But with us, we really want coaches that want to push the envelope of their own career by assuming more risk with clients where these decisions really matter. Like, I just finished lunch with a gentleman who won the gold medal in badminton in the Olympics, and we talked about the aggregation of all of these little details in being the best in the world in a sport like badminton. But these skills, for whether it's badminton, whether it's, I work a lot in American football with the NFL, whether it's all the same at level of high performance, like these little inflection points of improving performance, whether it's through nutritional intervention, whether it's through proper, execution, exercise selection, periodization is probably one of the most overlooked when it comes to this audience. Understanding proper exercise periodization in different phases and different goals, and the idea of like phasic potentiation. How can we compound the success of the intended adaptation per phase to ultimately build towards what we're trying to bring to the stage or to the platform? So it's really trying to pick apart and tease out every little ounce of performance. And as a coach, the only way you're going to be able to coach athletes of that mindset, and those are the best in the world, is if you adopt that mindset and that responsibility and that risk in the decisions that you make. So that's really kind of what we do. It's not for everyone. It is a little bit, into the weeds, but we always try and bring it back to, what are the reps and sets? What are the implications of reps and sets, exercise selection, exercise order, timing, frequency, duration, intensity? Because that's what I give a shit about. Because I always, I got into this as an athlete first, like, travel aside, I'll still walk around at, 122 kilos, give or take. And, far from my best day, but I still try and, keep this as something that, I have some skin in the game with, because these are the thought processes that drive my decision around my training. So it's not like I'm just kind of espousing a technical long answer to a short question, but it's something that I'm very passionate about getting that message right. Because I don't want this to reach someone and be like, oh, what's this Prescript stuff? And it's like, look, we move really fast. We think it's sophisticated. It's not necessarily simple. It can be easy if you dedicate the time to it, but it's really setting out exclusion criteria. Like, if you don't like that rant, like, you're not going to like any of the shit that we do, because it's that, and it'll be that. So you can sit down with a coach, or you can sit down with an athlete that's trying to be the best in the world, and you can have that same mindset of trying to be the best in the world as a coach. So that's really kind of what we center our approach around.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love that. I think anyone listening to this can definitely feel the passion that you have for it. And to me, it definitely bridges a certain gap that is still very apparent within our industry. We've got a very big divide still, where we've got people that are just application and no knowledge. So this is definitely bridging a gap where we've got application and knowledge combined, which will bring the best possible outcome as well. So I do think that it's a blessing to have services like this these days, because 5-6 years ago there was nothing like this available, nothing even close, remotely even close, that people could actually dig into and use to be a better coach or a better athlete as well. So first question before we actually go through into the little seminar that we'll have at Rotherham. So as a performance coach, what do you see most bodybuilders lacking when it comes to the training? And what the biggest mistakes you see as well that could potentially cost the progress?
Yeah, great question. I think it's trying to, so the short answer would be probably exercise selection and periodization. We've been doing this, and I love bodybuilding for the individual pursuit, the lone wolf. I am, for large in part, going to be the one held responsible for the success or failure of this endeavor, right? Like, no one's going to go in and lift a weight for you. So I love that accountability. Working in team sport settings is difficult because there's any given Sunday, right? If you guys are familiar with that movie, very difficult to attribute the success to it. One player can put in all the work, but there's going to be 10, 11 more guys on the field. So with that comes a blind spot, because you're blind to the amount of data that we have if we just know where to look for it, or if we just know who to ask for it. It's like, we can make decisions off of big data. We have so many bodybuilders that seemingly, veer off into different injuries or different, stubborn body parts or things that are going to bottleneck their progress. But there are KPIs that we can start to anchor to performance in the gym that might indicate that you're headed down this particular route. And we can, if we know that this information is out there, if we're even mindful of collecting the data on ourselves, and we start to see performance, and I think this is something that, I don't know if it necessarily differentiates us, but it's something that I focus on, and I focus on in instilling in our coaches, is that performance is our proxy to the success or failures, the affirmations of the decisions that we make. So we can, if we know enough of the ones and zeros, we can anticipate a particular result. And if we don't see that result, then we need to use that performance as an indicator that we need to change course. I think a lot of people, they get too fixated on like what's worked in the past or what a single training partner or coach has told them. And they abdicate that responsibility that is bodybuilding, where it's like, if you're diligent and if you're willing to do the work, it's like, there's a trend around guys that have elbow pain. There's a trend around guys that tear their quads. There's a trend around guys that tear their pecs. Like,
we're going to go into this bit. We're going to go into this bit.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's like, I've always remained, I'm an athlete first. I have a torn quad. I have a torn pec. So it's like, when I say this, I kind of know what the fuck I'm talking about through mileage. Like, I've done this and I've fallen victim to ignoring these warning signs, ignoring these data points, and not making informed decisions on exercise selection. So I think the biggest mistake from a very macro community perspective, especially in bodybuilding, is this lone wolf approach blinds people and insulates and silos people's way of looking at their progress and looking at their programming and being able to make informed decisions around why we should include an exercise, like direct and indirect benefits of exercise. Exercise are like drugs, where we're going to have a primary side effect and we're going to have secondary and tertiary and quaternary side effects. And it's like, how do we understand what level of adaptation we need to prioritize in order to sidestep some of these potential roadblocks and then keep going, or maybe even take a step back, right? And how do we know where to look? And then how do we, when we look there, how do we know how to interpret what we find? And how does that interpretation change in the way we order or organize or select or set up or prioritize or periodize different exercises at different times in the program?
Yes, I love that. I love that. And I think I couldn't agree any more with this, to be honest, because when you walk in the gym these days, and as you can probably experience that now living in Dubai, sometimes you walk in the gym and you just think, Jesus Christ, how are you still able to sit down, or are we still able to function as a human being? So next one, which you almost touched on, most common reasons for tendon injuries within bodybuilding. Obviously, you've had a pec tear. I'm pretty sure. Did you tear your quad off your? Did you tear your quad tendon as well, or just
quad? Yeah.
Really?
I tore part of my VMO.
Oh,
rep of a
shit.
300 kilo squat.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
I kind of zippered up. So I have like, and I'll show you when I'm in Rotherham. I have like a calcification. It's called myositis. It's basically I tore my VMO from just not the full thing, but it was an intermuscular tear that kind of zippered up from inside of my kneecap essentially, and pretty much went right up to the origin. So I have like what feels like a knuckle that sticks out of my quad, which is really just calcified, torn VMO that zippered up. Yeah. I did it on the second rep of a 300 kilo triple, and I went down and did a third, and I basically stood up on my left leg because my right quad was torn. But
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So I know a thing or two about that. And so to answer your question, I think very directly, the number one thing is load management, right? That's going to be our greatest predictor or our greatest driver of these tendon injuries, like tendinosis, tendonitis, tendinopathy, all these bullshit terms that you're going to go to some physio or chiro, and like, not to be disparaging, but there's not many of us out in the world, right? Like, because a physio can play these games with bands and cupping and fucking Theraguns. And if you don't lift, that's a crazy amount of stimulus. Like, there's someone who just sits on a couch, like, that's wild. Their nervous system is doing something rather than nothing. It's like, wow, that binary flip of a switch from 0 to 1 is yielding an adaptation and like, oh, it feels great. So they're just, this fucking unit's going to walk in and they're going to be like, all right, we're just going to grab the heavier TheraBand. It's like, you can't play checkers with this guy, man. You got to play 4D chess with his nervous system. Mate, so ultimately,
it's so funny you mentioned this, because I actually had an argument with a physio about tendon pain and about tendonitis. It was basically telling me the stuff that you would generally do with a 170-pound human being, where it's like, when you're dealing with bodybuilders that weigh 250 pounds, 260 pounds, it's a different ball game when it comes to actual tendon pain and when it comes to having any sort of tendonitis. But yeah, I'll let you carry on. But that actually made me laugh a lot. Yeah.
I'd hate to be on the other end of that. I would hate to argue with you with anyone. But okay, so yeah, load management. Now, load management is a little bit more complicated than just like, I should deload this week, right? Because it's understanding the load of the tendon versus the load on the muscle versus the load on the nervous system. Understanding fatigue at different levels, at like a local tissue level, at a systemic central nervous system level. So it's, tendonitis is often cited in this load management, under this load management umbrella, as overuse, right? Tendonitis, tendinosis, tendinopathy, jumper's knee, golfer's elbow, whatever. Assign a sport to a knee injury that might a tendon injury that might overuse that particular joint. But it's not, the pro golfers don't have golfer's elbow because their mechanics are sound. That's how they're pro golfer, part of how they're pro golfer, right? Like jumper's knee, I don't think that, like, at least in my experience in dealing with like long and triple jump and high jump athletes, I've never actually dealt with it. Basketball players have dealt with it. The number one issue with basketball players that I've worked with and how I've fixed jumper's knee in basketball players, get them to hang on the rim for half a second longer. It's like, yeah, look, dude, posterize the fuck out of everyone, but just hang there for once. So you're not, I literally had this guy last week. He's having a hell of a season. I can't. Yeah, he's one guy. I can't tell you who this player is. He's having an amazing season. He made the All-Star team. But like the thing that he did, and I worked with some really great strength coaches in the last offseason, but it's like he would just posterize guys. But as he swung through going a million miles an hour, his torso would be perpendicular to parallel to the floor. And then he would try and stick a landing. So he would somehow stick on one leg. And it's like, okay, it's not overuse, it's misuse. Dude, when you posterize, pendulum swing back and then just drop down. No knee pain. So that was what we worked on all offseason. It was like, I just need you to be like a little, like, be flashy, sure, but just think about the return journey. So ultimately, like with bodybuilding, it's like, the classic examples would probably be elbows and knees. And it's like, yeah, there could be an overuse from a frequency of training. But what they don't realize is that frequency of training is not how many times they're doing arms. It's the fact they're doing arms in times where they shouldn't be doing arms. Case in point, the barbell back squat. If you don't have the mobility at the shoulder to get, and you're trying to squat, or a hack squat or something that has your hands back here. Back squat is the most common, where you're now stressing a tendon, your medial or lateral epicondyle at the elbow. In this case, it would probably be medial. You're stressing that tendon, but it's not arm day, it's leg day. But then now every day turns into arm day, because if you're using that bicep to pull during lat day and you're trying to stay more focused on your lats, but you don't have that external rotation and you're internally rotating on your pullovers. And now it's like, well, guess what's taking the brunt? It's that tendon. So it is in part an overuse injury, but most people are like, oh man, I'm doing too much arms. It's like, no, you're just doing arms when you're doing legs, and you're doing arms when you're doing back, and you're doing arms when you're doing shoulders. So it's like, it's not about pulling out your arm day. It's making those days where you're training legs completely passive and inert on that particular tendon. So it's like load management is it's a tricky little equation. And this is where biomechanics becomes, almost like, I don't want to say necessarily an art, but you need to be able to know where to look to pick up this data. So, when it comes to bodybuilders, yeah, it's usually elbows and knees, usually stems from hips and shoulders, and more internally pelvis and rib cage. And a lot of it could be from a macro perspective, just doubling down on exercises that stress that tendon. But also from a more micro perspective, when we don't think those tendons are being stressed, if we don't have access to these ranges of motion, the ability to stabilize these ranges of motion, we're probably putting load on these tendons unwittingly. And then all of a sudden we wonder why, because you're using this nonstop. right? So it is as simple as an overuse injury, but it's also that overuse is a byproduct of misuse. And we don't see it because like, I'm going in and train legs today. I know more people that can't squat because of their elbows that can't squat because of their knees and lower back. Because they didn't realize that this elbow is working nonstop 6-7 training days a week under heavy load, but I just train arm 1 day a week. It's like, no, you're training it 5-6 days a week because you're not using the shoulder and rib cage the way you should. You're not for your knees. You're not using your hips and pelvis the way you should.
That is awesome. Write that down, people. I think, again, very, very useful information here, and it can potentially save a lot of injuries too. Especially within our culture at the moment, we're seeing a lot of pec tears and a lot of tears in general. Especially recently, I've seen probably about 4 people tear the shit. So definitely something I wanted to ask and cover, coming from the man himself. So again, Prescript, when we actually go back into it, mobility, stability, and strength. Elaborate on that a little bit, because that is definitely something that I very much like. In my opinion, mobility especially is something that's extremely undervalued, because this is off one of your posts, actually, one of your recent posts when you actually stood on one leg. Let me just quote it. I actually like that. Do you remember the post that you made when you stood on one leg about the squat?
If you can't stand on one leg, don't squat with 2.
Yes, dig into that a little bit. I like that. And I think that's something that a lot of us can relate to, including myself, because I used to be terrible. I'm not going to lie. I'm much better now. I'm actually doing some sort of mobility work and prehab work before every single session. And I can honestly say the difference it's made is ridiculous. Touch wood. I've been pretty injury-free and smooth process, all the way through. So
that sentiment is just trying to capture the importance. Really what it's meant to do is capture the importance of motor learning. Now, motor learning is a very complex, neuromechanical process. And without getting too deep down like a nerd rabbit hole, it's essentially we have an internal motion capture system in our body, right? So think of how a CGI character would be made in a video game, right? Anyone sat around and played FIFA, trying to speak to a European audience, the idea of playing soccer on a video game is the most boring shit in the fucking world. But if you're so inclined to sit on the couch and play video games, they had to make Ronaldo. Does he still play? I think he still plays. They had to make Ronaldo as this avatar character. So what they do is they take Cristiano into a lab and they put these little electrode-y ping pong ball looking things on this Lycra spandex suit. So it denotes hey, Ronaldo's wrist is here, and maybe depending on detail, games are pretty clever now, so it's probably all over. But his fingers are here, and his elbow is here, and his shoulder is here. And they do the same thing with sport performance. If you ever look at breakdown of a golf swing, if you ever look at breakdown of what else uses motion capture a lot? Baseball pitchers, very classic example. But basically, they're using this motion capture system. Hey, wear this Lycra get up with all of these ping pong balls all over. And these ping pong balls are sensors that'll send into central processing, the brain, or in this case, a computer, but in our case, the brain. And it'll create a digital avatar of the way this thing moves, usually represented as a stick figure. And then they can turn that stick figure into Ronaldo. They can turn that stick figure into fucking Gollum from Lord of the Rings. Same fucking technology. In our human body, we have these different ping pong ball receptor things all over. Now, with mobility, stability, and strength, mobility and stability are always the contentious one. Strength is sort of a byproduct, and this is really kind of an equation or a procedure. So mobility and stability are really in reference to 2 of our main ping pong ball receptors that help us create an internal motion capture in our brain of the way we're moving through space and space and time. So mobility and stability is really from the deepest neurological depths. It's really it's the interaction between our Golgi tendon organ and our muscle spindles, which are the fastest transmitting signals that go to our internal processor or central processor, the brain, right? So what might help bring this picture a little bit more full circle is some of the other things. So Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindles have to do directly with the perception of onset and duration of muscle stretch, right? Which is kind of more mobility. And then stability has more to do with muscle contraction, right? So creating a reflexive contraction. That's why, like, when you stand on one leg, you're probably pretty shaky. When you put a kettlebell over your head,
not anymore, mate. Not anymore. Listen, not anymore. Not anymore.
But what
I'm solid now.
it's a reflex arc, essentially. It's like your body, because you always notice that you're lacking stability at end ranges of motion. And it's like, well, it seems obvious, but it's not really obvious as to why that is. So as these muscles stretch, as we approach these end ranges, like my teres minor stretched in the overhead position, my glute med stretches as I hinge on one leg. But with the rapid onset of change in length, it's like my body's trying to keep my center of mass over my base support. Well, if my base support is limited, these muscles are working like a suspension bridge to really hold this entire apparatus up. So it's like these rapid changes in length mixed with the fact that they're paired with something that will actually contract the muscle, that shakiness that we see, that we can just subjectively call instability, is really a representation, a visual subjective representation of this arc of this muscle's ability to find a proper length tension relationship to keep our skeleton aligned over itself in whatever position that is. So that's like the deep shit. Now, why does that matter to bodybuilders? It's like, we never use, and because a lot of times bodybuilding ends up being not necessarily low skill, but at mass, I would say. Like, I feel bad saying this to you because of the intent and intensity you put into your training. But bodybuilding at large, I would say, is low skill, high output. We're going to sit on machines and we're going to externally nullify these signals that are going to central processing. And a lot of times when we do that, we seek alternate means in which to create sensation back to our brain, to create some sort of resemblance of this internal motion capture. Our brain doesn't like to not know where our body is, because the default signal when that's the case is usually pain. So bodybuilders go to like extraneous lengths to start to fill in some of the slower adaptations, some of the slower signals that aren't the ones that are derived from like basically stretching and stability work. Which are, and it's so funny when you look at the deep stimulus or the deeper levels of stimulus that trigger some of these other nerve endings, which are, I'm going to say a bunch if you guys want to Google search them. I think it's definitely it is the single coolest thing I think the nervous system has solved a problem for. And when I lay them out and we see how often we're reaching at lesser adaptations rather than just doing damn stretching and stability work, which costs nothing. And you don't have to recharge any fucking batteries, and there's no tape involved, and there's no any bullshit like this. So if you wanted to look up like a thing called Ruffini endings, Pacinian corpuscles, Meissner's corpuscles, Merkel's disc, they're all just these little fucking cutesy scientific names, usually named after people, for nerve endings in our body that signals the central processor, basically just where this joint or part of your body is in space. So you have these things, and of that list I just rattled off, one of them gets stimulated through vibration. So let's remember that, vibration. One gets stimulated through deep pressure. That's another one. So when deep pressure is present, this particular nerve ending sends a signal to central processing. Vibration, deep pressure, light touch is another one. Skin stretch is another one. Heat is another one. Vibration is another one. We have all these unique stimulus that when this stimulus is present, these particular nerve endings go, oh, okay, I sense this vibration, I send to central processing. But think of what I just said. Skin stretch, deep pressure, vibration, heat. Okay, what do most bodybuilders wear on their elbows and knees when they train? Knee sleeves.
Yeah.
What is that? Well, probably some skin stretch, probably a decent amount of heat, right? So you're getting, or maybe even some light touch. Foam rolling. Why are there foam rollers in every gym in the fucking world? And everyone's like, oh, it's breaking up scar tissue. No, it's not. It's just signaling one of these slower deep pressure. It will apply deep pressure stimulus, and your body goes, oh, because they would not be as popular as they are if it didn't work. In work in the sense of like, I do this thing and then my knee doesn't hurt. If I foam roll before I run on a treadmill or whatever the fuck, like. So like nerds can sit there, and this is where like I think I take a different stance as an educator. It's like, I'm going to listen to this big data. The big data is some fucking asshole made a foam cigarette and sold it to everyone on the planet. Like, that's amazing to me. I'm not going to ignore that and be like, it doesn't break up scar tissue. This is bullshit. It's like, you're bullshit, because I want to sell my shit to everyone in the world. How is this working? And I think that's large in part to what it's doing. It's a very inexpensive modality to fill in a gap in the nervous system where we've completely nullified the need for any of this to be present, because we sit on machines, which are great for building muscle. And look, we want to sit on as many machines as possible with the best profile. And if we can teach ourselves to work through these sticking points that are advantageously placed through the strength curve of the muscle, holy shit, you're going to just put on so much muscle. But you need to minimize the collateral. You need to minimize the bottlenecks, which will come at the cost of nullifying these other stimulants, right? So what have I said? Knee sleeves. I've looked at foam rollers, Theraguns. How many guys are just sitting around before their session with a fucking DeWalt Dremel drill with a wine cork on it? Just, that's vibration. That's a specific, and it's like, dude, our nervous system is just telling us, like, look, there's two that sit and they literally go, and the nerve fiber that they transmit through is the alpha motor neuron. Alpha, it's the first letter of the alphabet. And it moves 120 meters per second. All of these heat, vibration, deep pressure, all of those particular nerve endings, at most, they're going to move at like maybe 60, 70 meters per second. But the stretching one, when we do like one of these and some of this shit that people are doing for like 100 years, and the standing on one leg thing, which by the way is how we walk around. So the instability and the static stretching one moves at 120 meters per second to the brain. Our body tells us, like, have you ever eaten so much and not realized you're full until like 30 minutes later? I find that a really interesting parallel. It's because our brains, like, in order to survive, not many people have been, and maybe this will be the case now. Maybe we'll actually start to have that transmission be faster because we're a bunch of gluttonous fucks. But it's like, our body would never had to adapt because people were eating themselves to death. It's like, this transmission has to be immediate.
Some people do, mate. Some people actually do.
Right. Yeah, nowadays, but like, these adaptations have happened over, hundreds of thousands of years. So it's like, there's not many Joey Chestnuts and Kobayashis in the world just eating 78 hot dogs in a minute or whatever the fuck. So it's like, that signal goes slow because it's like, why would it have to move fast? So our body prioritizes. Here's a really interesting one. Have you ever seen the Batman movie where it's the Heath Ledger Joker one, and he's in the interrogation room, in the cell, and the one cop leaves and you don't know Batman's right behind him. And then he just fucking, I love it. Like, he takes his head and just slaps it. That's what I do. But the guy goes, you never start with the head because they don't feel the next one. And that's kind of true. So when you look at the brain in the way, like, so as I put my hands together, for those of you watching on YouTube, this is it's the central fissure of the two hemispheres of the brain. And sensory perception for more important evolutionary processes actually reside deeper in the center of the brain, because you need to protect those so you feel those so you can stay alive and reproduce. Basically what I'm saying, your testicles are here in the center of your brain. Because if I get punched in the head, I'd still like to know very quickly and very abruptly if someone kicks me in the dick. Like, I'd really like to know that. Where, like, your toe is like here. So if someone punches me in the head and then someone is also like stabbing me in the toe, I don't care, because I don't need the toe to survive. Right? So I don't need to like expend all my mental energy perceiving this little distal pinky toe if I'm getting punched in the head. So a punch in the head will kind of numb that perception of the toe getting stabbed or whatever the fuck. I don't know who we're fighting that's punching us in the head and also stabbing us in the toe. But it will 100%, just given the organization of what's called like this homunculus, this representation of how the human body is mapped in the cortex or the central fissure of our brain. It's protective in the way it's adapted within the actual cortex itself, in its location. So it's like, if I'm looking at motor neurons that are firing to central processing and going like, why? And this is the funny part. All of this ends up is like, hey, maybe you should stretch a little bit. If you're going to do foam rolling, do some static stretching and say, no, what leg? But like, why not have this cool, fun PhD dissertation on nerve endings and talk about Batman and getting stabbed in the toe? Because it's like, it's a hard thing to sell to some people. Like, no, I like doing the Theragun thing. It's like, okay, cool. That tells me that you're missing pieces, that you have some things offline in this external motion capture, internal motion capture mechanism. And why not just do the most efficient thing? So we don't need to sit around on the fucking turf in your gym where no one does turf things and everyone just does a bunch of foam rolly shit. Why not just do like a few pointed static stretches, which are going to fire that alpha motor neuron? Why not do a few stability exercises, which will fire on that alpha motor neuron, so the muscle spindle and the Golgi tendon organ reflex, rather than sitting here and fucking around with the lower level shit that is going to go 70 meters per second, which is your heat, which is your skin stretch, which is your vibration, which is your deep pressure. Let's just go right to the alpha shit. And let's just do the fast stuff that's going to work. And let that be the thing that fills in these gaps for us, right? So long answer to a short question. I'm going to be honest, I don't remember what the question was anymore. But it's like, yeah, static stretching is cool. Probably do it before you do the stability stuff. Polish that reflex arc of the Golgi tendon organ and the muscle spindle. What does that mean? I don't know. Stretch your lats, put a kettlebell over your head before you do your back or before you do your press. And stretch your pec and put a kettlebell over your head before you do your press. And do that a few times a week. And your brain will start to know where your body is and will start to return with an increase of performance. Like, oh, I feel confident that I can send a transmission through that ventral spinal nerve to the pec and actually contract this as hard as I can because I'm not worried about the integrity of the shoulder. Because I know that the shoulder is cool in its unstable position. So when I put it in a stable position on a great piece of, prime kit or whatever, it's all systems go. There's no governor on the output. It's as much as your fucking tissue will be able to. You'll be able to express the strength you have. We chase these crazy, inane ways of like setting up and periodizing and banding and all this stuff. It's like, you're not even bringing all your dogs to the fight, man. Like, let's do that first. Let's do like the simple thing. Like, it's not easy. Like when I sit here and rattle all this shit off, I'm like, what the fuck? What am I telling you? I'm telling you static stretching and stability work before you train is an expedient way to minimize or mitigate the risk of the perception of this pain. And it's just perception.
Everyone's going to be like, oh my God, it's told me to static stretch before I train. No.
Which is like, look at I want to offshoot on that really quickly, because if you actually examine the poor research that's done on static stretching and its depreciation on performance, it's always in a very absurd setting by my estimation. It's like literally one of the studies was doing a modified hurdler stretch, which is like the seated hamstring stretch, for like 90 seconds and then go into a max vertical jump. It's like, yeah, you don't do that, you jackass, because that's the equation for pulling a hamstring. But it's like, notice how I said, hey, if you're going to train pecs, stretch your lats and then put a kettlebell over your head, because they're both internal rotators, adductors, extenders of the shoulder. Depending on the position, they can actually, the lat can be a flexor just like the pec. All to say, the lats share more actions of the shoulder than they oppose with the pec. Right? They're sort of this weird analogous fan-shaped muscle. They kind of do the same thing. Depending on the position.
It actually covers this on the course as well in detail.
This is why this course takes like 4.5 months now. It's long. It's taken 20 weeks, like more often than it's taken 16 now. What? Anyway, so that's why I said that very specifically. I was like, hey, before you train your pecs, stretch your lats, because you're not going to be inhibited. Your lats aren't going to be biasing you into this internal rotation, but we're also avoiding whatever potential that research is telling us. Like, okay, fine. I just need more abduction, extension, external rotation. Well, my lats are going to potentially limit me from doing that. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to get some of that, that reflexive, dorsally innervated reflexive loop through that alpha motor neuron. I'm going to get that stability stimulus, which if you want to fucking argue the difference between, if you want to have some fucking bullshit argument about there's 3 types of muscle contraction, isometric, concentric, and eccentric, I'll send you my fucking home address. I live at 1 Sheikh Zayed Road, Duja Tower here in Dubai. I'm at 5107. Come by anytime. That door is locked for your safety, not fucking mine. Because it's like, it's such an inane argument, because it's like, yes, muscles contract isometrically, they contract concentrically, and they contract eccentrically, but are they contracting by starting here, or are they contracting by starting at a perception at the level of the muscle? Is it a retrograde muscle contraction, or is it an anterograde? When I go, hey, bicep curl, That's what my C5, my fifth cervical vertebra of the spinal nerve. So that it goes pre-primary motor cortex down through, it kind of makes a stop off in the cerebellum, and then it goes out into this. Imagine, like, how does this actually happen? We take for granted like that this shit happens, but it has to be proceduralized. So it starts kind of here, like around this parietal lobe, and then it goes down through the brainstem, out through the ventral nerve to like 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth cervical vertebra. Then it goes out through the brachial plexus, and it divides from roots to branches to trunks, and it eventually ends up here. And whatever troponin C, sarcoplasmic reticulum muscle contraction shit. But like, that's a lot of stuff that we just go, oh, I'll just do a bicep curl. It's like, yeah, whatever, fine. Don't be the best in the world. That's up to you. I don't give a shit. But it's like, people will look at that and be like, well, this muscle is just contracting. But it's like, what about when I do a shoulder press? I get to here. This is a really unstable position on the shoulder. I can literally see as I come down, my bicep contract, but I'm not flexing my bicep. My elbow is flexing. And this might be an eccentric load, but there's parts where I see this fire more than not. That didn't start here in my brain. That started here in my bicep, going back into my spinal cord and expressing that reflex arc of the Golgi tendon, organ, and muscle spindle. So it's like, just zoom out, right? Like zoom out. And when it comes to like, in order to see the big picture, you have to be able to go all the way in and go all the way out. Think of like a picture on like your phone. Like our cameras on our phone can take a high enough resolution picture that I could take it and I could put it on my living room wall here, and it would still be crystal clear in a 3x5, right? But that's because it has enough data. There's enough pixels in it that it can blow all the way out. Where it's like a lot of people, is like if you can't see things in that resolution, you actually physically can't zoom out enough because you lose what the picture is, right? It's all pixelated. And I think that's like an analogy that people, when they're like, why does this matter? It's like, because I literally just sat down, we're talking about the next Olympics. He just won the gold medal. His name's Victor Excelsen. He's from Denmark. He's like one of the only white dudes to ever win the gold medal against a bunch of Chinese guys that play badminton all the time.
Is it?
But we're literally talking in quadrennial cycles.
Yeah.
So I need to zoom out 4 years to the Olympics, but I also need to be able to zoom in within a calendar year because he plays some important tournaments. One of them is actually in March in the UK. So it's like, okay, what is our, and then you need to be able to zoom in. So I'll zoom out from Olympic to Olympic, then within 365 days, then break down, meso, macro, micro cycles within that. But I'm really going to bring this all the way down to your nervous system, to like the dendrite in which these adaptations are going to actually start to occur and learn in the nervous system. But it's like, and if you don't know this, you can't see this in high resolution. This picture of a quadrennial Olympic cycle is going to be so pixelated, right? But this has to be high resolution because I need to sit to a guy who's do you watch this guy play badminton? You get hype as fuck on badminton because he's like,
we have to play badminton now.
Dude, he approaches it like the way you approach your training. Like I watched, and I told you this when you were on my podcast. Like I sat in 7 gym the other day, and I did not watch a train. And I just went to your YouTube channel, and I watched your off-season push. You talked about your client check-ins. You got the 2 bikini girls that were coming up this year. They both got a shot, and I was just like, because you talk about it, I'm like, this is how I talk about it. This is how Victor talks about fucking badminton. This is how Jarvis Landry talks about football. It's like that. Whatever that is, that wanting us to be the best. But this is the thought process. So it's like, yeah, why is he talking about the central nervous system? It's just reps and sets. It's like, okay, that's fine. That's fine. It's totally fine. And there are people who will get to a certain degree in their or level in their sport. Talent. Sure. Great. That wasn't me, right? My future was like, I was supposed to put 3 screws in the door of a Pacifica, which is an SUV, on a fucking assembly line. But I'm like, oh, weight training, this is cool. Okay, I'll just read this, and I don't want to have to pick up doors on SUVs.
Love it. Right, before we actually get into the last question, tell us a little bit about the Hypertrophy Intensive course that we have. Let me just get the date, March 26th and 27th. I don't want to get the dates wrong, but that will be hosted at UltraFlex in Rotherham. So I will put link in the description below where you can actually hop on the course. I'm pretty sure there's still spaces left available. So you will be able to actually jump on that. Tell us a little bit about the course, what you will be covering and how. And I know that you've actually got some more courses going. So if you want to tell us a little bit about your tour that you're doing in the UK. We could call it a tour, couldn't we? It's a little bit of a
Yeah,
tour.
see,
A little bit of
I
a
don't
tour.
think, like I said, no one's going to argue with you. So like,
A little bit of a tour.
Yeah. So Luke Miller and I will be coming to collaborate on the Hypertrophy Intensive. We worked together at MI40 in Tampa Bay earlier. Really, Luke approaches this to the same level of depth and detail as you do, as I try to emulate. So really the goal is going to be with the Hypertrophy Intensive. One day is going to be upper, one day is going to be lower. And it's really based off of the adage of aim small, miss small, right? So for setup, stabilization, execution, adaptation, optimization, understanding where we look to make these changes per the individual. So like, you can read a textbook to see where the pec inserts and where it originates from, but I don't care. So I'm going to drill people on anatomy. And this is, if you come, this is what I'm going to do. And I'll know who listened to this podcast and who didn't, is I'm going to ask you, what is the insertion of the bicep? What is the origin? And there's going to be some cute fucking cut that just goes the lateral lip of the bicipital groove and fucking radial tuberosity. I'm like, I don't give a shit. I want you to go here and here and here. That's the answer. That's always the answer. The insertion, where does it originate? It doesn't originate on a fucking Zoom call. That's for sure. It originates here and here and here, right? Or, where is it? Because you got to go up to someone. And this is where, like, understanding this allows, especially when watching you train such a range of body types and athletes. Like, this is where, you see coaches almost fill into one. All their athletes start to look the same. It's like they're 5'3" to 5'4". This is just like the short bodybuilder guy. It's like whatever he does just seems to work. And anyone who's taller or bigger, narrower, deeper rib cage can't seem to figure that out, because he just goes, I don't know. This is what works for me. It's like, no, that's just what works for guys that are 5'2". And it's like, but in order to be dynamic, and this is like, something that I am a huge proponent, even on myself. So I can go not from, tall bodybuilder to short bodybuilder. I can go from bodybuilder to football player to track and field athlete to badminton player, right? And have that ability to be dynamic. It's to understand, like, okay, we're going to walk through, right, what I'll call like the inner valence muscles. Like, what are these things that are going to trip you up? If bodybuilding and hypertrophy training is your goal, it's really like, to sample a Stan Efferding quote that I really like. It's compliance is the science. Stan's jacked as hell because Stan's still lifting, right? Fuck with that. So we're going to look at inner valence, scapular, rib cage, pelvic, hip joint mechanics. I mean, okay, here's the Cole's Notes version of where bodybuilding style training is going to lead you astray. Here's how you apply, and here's how you apply minimum effective dose of quote unquote corrective exercises. But here are exercises that I want you to periodize that are hypertrophy focused, and this is how I want you to execute them in order to have this corrective exercise stimulus actually resonate as just exercising correctly. Make it loadable, make it something that becomes more beneficial with intensity, with duration, with velocity. So as we move things faster, as we move things longer, as we move things heavier, these setups are going to future-proof your program. Then after that, we're going to get into the outer valence muscle groups. So moving out from the serratus and the rotator cuff and like the lower trap, and looking at the glute med and the piriformis and the hip flexor and the adductors. We're going to move out into the big muscle groups. So on lower body day, we're going to get into length tension relationships, exercise selection, setup, stabilization, execution, ordering for glute max, hamstring, quads, gastroc soleus. Upper body day, we're going to go bicep, tricep, delt, lat, and pec. So we start the day off, inner valence stuff, very like actionable Cole's Notes. Write this down. This is what we do. Here's a brief understanding as to why, then getting into like, okay, let's retrofit everyone into these positions, into these exercises to train these muscles. You're tall. Okay, what do we do with tall people? Where are we looking? What is the insertion? Oh, it's here and here. Oh, great. Where is it on this person? Oh, the pec is here. Oh, his rib cage is deeper. So a bench press is a half decent exercise for him. Oh, his rib cage is narrower. We're going to have to go into a fly with a cable, like being able to just look at exercise as problem solving, and being able to work within that model. So that's really going to be the seminar. So day one is going to be upper body. Day two is going to be lower body. The morning is going to start with, some lighter lecture-based material on sort of the quote unquote corrective stuff, like the big rocks we can turn over, in our programming and creating systems approach for sort of future proofing. I don't want to say bulletproofing because I don't like that. Anyone who's ever seen anyone get shot knows that like, oh, band's not really going to help. But like future proofing your shoulder, future proofing your hip, not only in real time by making transient changes, the perception of pain or these little niggles that we get in our training, but also how does that translate into the exercises we choose for shoulder, for hip, for rib cage, for pelvis, for elbow, for knee, and sort of outward. So that's going to be the seminar Luke and I are going to rip through. It's going to be cool. And we've done it in the past. We did it at my 40 almost by happenstance. I invited him out. He came out. He's obviously a great educator with a great amount of experience as a coach, and his attention to detail is second to none. So it'll be a hell of a lot of fun. And then after, we're gonna train. Everyone stick around, bring your fucking kit, and like I want to see it because I don't care if you can circle C on a bubble sheet. There won't be a test. The test will be like, all right, if I see you fucking up on an exercise, don't come back the next day. That'll be the UltraFlex Rother. I'm really looking forward to that. The Hypertrophy Intensive we do lower and upper intensives that are a little bit more clinical in our approach, a little bit more theory based, but hypertrophy is like, all right, like we know the audience, we know the gym, obviously like culture starts from the top, and with you being there, it's like, let's get down to brass tacks here. All right? It's not about what you know, it's about what you can prove. So we're gonna keep it extra gangster in Rotherham, as is the way.
Let's go. Looking forward to that one, mate. I cannot wait. Not long as well now. So hopefully we'll see a lot of people there. So I'm looking forward to it. Last one, and this is going to be a good one. Right. So obviously we all know that you deal with elite level performance athletes. So I want to know Jordan's principles for maximizing performance in elite level sports people.
Yeah. It's a really good timing that we're having this conversation because I had a coach that works with me kind of sitting in on this meeting with this athlete that I was just consulting with. And it's really understanding the psychological mindset of the athlete first. Like, and we played this out in real time. And I don't want to kind of put his business in the street, but it's like when I sat down with this particular athlete, the first thing he started talking about was podcasts he'd listened to about performance. And he talked about like this physician named Peter Attia and this idea of like, zones of aerobic capacity and all that. I'm like, okay, immediately what I'm hearing is a very analytical mind, but it's like, there's a lifestyle component to it. It's really, have you ever, and I brought this up, have you ever seen or heard of the movie called Moneyball?
No. In fact, yeah. No, yeah, yes.
So it's a baseball flick. Right. It's a baseball flick. And one of the things that I loved about the movie was I forget what character was talking about. What basically he talked about the pitcher and the pitcher having like a really good looking wife. And the guy's like, this dude's confident as hell because he's an ugly motherfucker. But somehow it's like reading between the lines. It's like, this guy will be your closer. Why? He's like, because his wife's a rocket. And it's like, okay, there's a level of confidence there that if you're looking for it, that you're not going to necessarily see it on paper. So it's like, number one, I think where people go wrong is like, they don't like, as much as I talk about like as biomechanics and like, neuroscience is my job. I'm not in the neuroscience business. We're all in the people business. Right. And I got that. I was over here. I was with Tony Doherty, owner of Doherty's gym in Australia. And he said that to me. He's like, I'm not in the gym business. I'm in the people business. And Tony's a proper gangster, like an absolute villain, a wicked guy. And he's done amazing work with that gym. Doherty's is definitely like a mecca, in my opinion, when it comes to gyms the world over. And it's mindsets like that put guys in positions like that. And as far as I'm concerned. So it's like, I'm in the people business. So when I sit down in a role like that, the biggest inflection points of performance are going to be derived in how do I make this guy more confident in the approach that we take? Some guys want to be hands-on. Some guys want me to be white lab coat, big words. Some guys want to be dumb it down to the nth degree. Some guys want to be involved. Some guys don't want to be involved. Some guys want the music really loud. Some guys don't want any music at all. That's the shit that really matters, right? The other stuff runs on autopilot now. Like, it's to a point where I don't think there's not that there's not more to know because, research is always uncovering new ideas, but I don't know enough on the human side of things. as far as like driving motivation, maintaining discipline, using motivation as a precursor to discipline, picking up between the lines. There's so much more for me to dedicate my attention to, and that will likely yield exponentially better results. He said it himself. He was like, there are days where I feel tired, but I perform well. But that instills a doubt, because then he logically can flip that. And then what if on days I feel well, I don't perform well? Right. So it's like you start to deal with this dualistic way of thinking, like, oh, okay, this guy is analytical. So our entire conversation was, I want you to do blood work. I want you to do, I mean, we're not thinking blood work in the way that we would look at it in a bodybuilding perspective, because it's like, Wada's at his door. He's an Olympic gold medalist. Like, you're not going to deal with, those kind of fluctuations, but he's going to be looking at a ton of numbers. And if we're going to make like minor changes towards optimal, what we're really optimizing is the confidence in the approach. We're optimizing it every day, every rep, every set he goes in. We even talked about this. He was working with, or he works with another coach. And I was like, let me talk to him. Let me just be boots on the ground. Let me be the guy that just stands there. So in your head, if I say nothing, that's good news, rather than being in your own head going, did I do those 8 reps right? And have that compounding and manifesting. And like, even in the way he framed it, like he's right in the peak of his, and I don't, he's right in the peak of his career as far as age goes. And he's like, oh, I want to be able to do this for a long time. It's like, that's a depreciating mindset, right? Where it's like, and I use the example, like my parents grew up, my father's dad, I think, died in his 60s. But it's like, my dad's well into his 60s now, but when his father passed, he knew that he would outlive his father. Because like my dad's dad grew up in a time where it's like, hey, people just lived to 60, right? Because they all smoked cigarettes and they didn't know that was bad for them. It's like, well, look, you're basing the lifespan of an athlete off of lifespans or life cycles already here and gone. The rate in which we're making developments. It's like, let's look at this as an appreciating mindset. So not how you can sustain. It's like, how can you thrive? How can you appreciate? So it's like, it's funny to have an entire conversation about like the potentially the dumbest, most useless neuroscience ever. I'd be like, how do you get elite athletes better? Like, listen to them. You have to listen to them. You have to listen. You have to understand what they're saying. Don't just hear what they're saying. And that's the soft skill. That's the hard science. And so it's like, but part of it is when I do run into, and I gravitate, I think, in athletes that think more like that, gravitate to a more analytical mind, because there's confidence when I can go into the depths and zoom in and out on this. And that leaves me dynamic. It's like, there's some guys I work with that it's like, and they've told me this, that when I showed up in the town that they rented, I did my homework on them. They like Porsches. They like sports cars. You know what I rented? A Porsche.
Yeah. Yes.
This is my guy right here. It's like, I mean, don't get me wrong. It's a cool business expense. It's a ridiculous automobile, but it's like, do your homework, but do your homework on what matters. Like, you're in the people business always. In the back end, day to day, like, yeah, absolutely. Learn as much as you can, because it's going to make you more dynamic in the clientele that you can work with. And some guys know their niche, which is great. And I think there's a real skill to that. But like, for me, it's I want to be able to keep this door open for everyone. So it's like, sometimes it's like, yeah, it's going to be a Mercedes GTS at Enterprise. Here you go. Hopefully that credit card works. And then some days it's going to be like, I'm wearing my glasses today. Do you think that's by accident? No, because I just came from a meeting where it's like, I did my homework. It's like, no one in the NFL knows I wear glasses. Not a single athlete ever, right? I come in like off-white, everything in the sports car. And like, yeah, don't get me wrong, I love that shit. That's great. But it's like, you gotta make them comfortable. Like, they're such a rare commodity. And I told them this, and I tell all the athletes this, like, how does this work? I was like, your proof of concept that zooming in and zooming out and the ability to go down to the molecule and span out 4 years matters. Because not many people have put in the work on the other end of it to actually be able to take this software and then put it in a vehicle to see if this chip, when it runs faster than someone else's. And so that to me is like, that is the coaching aspect of it. So, and a lot of people can get lost in the theoretical side of it, but it's like always the people side, always, right? So if that is something that is should never be lost as you go through, like always make it applicable, but you're not going to have anyone to apply it to if you don't understand the motivations and the insecurities and the doubts that are going to stem in the athlete stories that they tell themselves. It's like, those are the conversations you have to have. That's what you have to pay attention to.
Yes. That's, do you know what? I don't think anyone probably expected this to come out.
Yeah,
everyone's definitely expecting like something, you know, really detailed and like, right, let's dive deep into that. But that was definitely an eye-opener. And do you know what? It makes sense. 100% makes sense. I think if you can get in someone's head, it can make a world of a difference to performance. But obviously, you need the other side of things as well. That will actually help the performance too. But Jordan, that was an amazing podcast. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on. Before we actually leave, sell yourself a little bit. Where can people find you? And what is the best method to actually get in touch for your services, for what you do, and for what you provide as well?
Yeah, so Instagram, probably if you're just trying to like keep an eye on what we do. So it's at _muscle_doc. You know, we have a fairly full course calendar in 2022, both in person and digitally. This will be kind of actually the first time I feel confident in announcing it. So this will be an exclusive. We're lucky enough to be expanding Prescript into the nutrition side. So we have Dr. Dwayne Jackson, tenure professor from University of Western Ontario School of Medicine, Yale trained PhD and postdoc, over 100 peer-reviewed scholarly journal articles written by him, research that he's done, unbelievable pedigree and platform, heading up our nutrition education. So if you guys are interested in this level of depth and detail while still being applied, he's actually a former bodybuilder as well in Canada. So he knows the hard and soft science of it. He knows the motivation discipline side. So that's going to be something big coming out in May. And this will be the first time that this has been announced. So keep an eye on that. I think that's what I'm most excited for this year, is to learn from Dwayne, an absolute gun. And when it comes to understanding how to educate, he's been a professor for 20 years at one of the top medical schools in North America. So to have him coming on with us at Prescript is a huge honor. PSL1 is sort of our fundamental biomechanics functional anatomy course. It's sort of the intro to some of the concepts that we touched on today. It's in its current semester right now. I teach it live twice a week. I actually have a lecture in an hour here that I'll teach to our class that's 4 weeks into the current semester. So that means we will be teeing up our next semester in mid-May. So that's our level one. Obviously, level two, level one's a prerequisite. We have Prescript barbell, which is adaptations, optimizations around the big three movements: squat, bench, and deadlift. So if you're more strength training inclined, that's a 9-week course. Both the level one and the barbell manual have textbooks that accompany them that I've written both. They're both about 65 to 70,000 words. That is included in the price of the course as well. With Killian Hamilton, who's a coach of ours that works in sort of like organizational behavior and modeling exercise programming. He has a course called Skill Acquisition, which is a really interesting way to look at periodization. That will be running in May as well. We have an Olympic weightlifting course. Just go to prescript.com. It's all there. It's a fairly expansive curriculum. All are NASM and NSCA certified for continuing education hours. But yeah, it'd be a whole other podcast just going through the curriculum of Prescript as a company. If you're interested, keep an eye on Prescript. It's pre_script on Instagram or www.pre-script.com.
Absolutely awesome. Thank you, Jordan. And
pleasure, man.
I will be seeing you next month. Hopefully, one thing I'll say, if we are training, you're going to have to start eating some meals, mate, because you are looking a bit thin. So, you know, gonna have to do a little bit of you're going to have to do a mini off season, mate, beforehand.
I'm some proper fuck, man. I'm just going to get really big Trained by JP shirts. That's what I'm going to do.
Yes. I've got those here, mate. You can have some. It's fine.
Appreciate that, man. But hopefully I have some size on so I can stand next to you. But always a pleasure. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, man. And thank you for your time as always, brother.
Good, man.